joining us today on Lattes with Leaders.
I'm Zainab.
And I'm Trisha. And we're excited for you to join us as we catch up over coffee with CEOs and executives from diverse backgrounds and industries.
We seek to discover what is unique about each leader and educate you guys on new and interesting topics. Our conversations seek to enlighten and inspire people from around the world to realize that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things.
We really work with people and try to convince them through our evidence that it's possible to make the different parts of your life better at the same time. And we call that a four-way win. And the four refers to career, home, community, and self.
In this episode, we connect with Alyssa Westring, the chair of the Department of Management and Entrepreneurship in the Driehaus College of Business at DePaul University, and an award-winning educator. Her research focuses on activating leadership in all domains of life, including parenting, and she's co-authored a book which delves into this topic called Parents Who Lead. We're excited to discuss what it means to take the principles of leadership into your personal life, busting some classic work-life balance stereotypes. We start our conversation on the topic of quiet quitting. Stay tuned. There's this concept of quiet quitting where people are saying no to that and are just deciding to set boundaries and say, okay, this is how much work constitutes what I'm expected to do in a day, and I will do no more. But then the second part to it, which I think is the more concerning part, is that people are not really delivering the impact that that is needed to succeed as a company. So I guess the question here is, with quiet quitting, what part of it is maybe actually a good thing, right? People are being conscious about what their time constraints are, what their capacity should look like on a day-to-day basis, versus what's maybe not so good, and maybe companies are losing productivity because of it, and companies are not as successful because their employees are just sitting there going, you know what, I don't really want to commit to this job.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Given that we all went through COVID over the last 2 years. And I think that context is actually quite important in the phenomenon that's happening now, because the sense that I get is people went through quite a lot of trauma during that 2-year period, particularly in US, Europe, the UK, due to these extended lockdowns, isolation, and then still having to manage work and life, and potentially not having the option to send your kids to daycare. So you're trying to manage kind of children as well. And Alyssa, keen to hear whether you agree on this, but I get the feeling that it's a like burnout response from people being like, for 2 years it was just too much, and now I just can't deal with the expectations.
Yeah, I think that that's part of it. And I also think people learned a lot about themselves and their priorities during COVID, as well as what your company will really do for you, how your company will accommodate you. And they may not be willing to go above and beyond as much as they used to. But I also think it's a really good opportunity for companies and for leaders to start thinking about what's the job description? What are we actually expecting of our employees? Because if we are relying on them to go, 20% over, 30% over what their job description actually is, then maybe the job description's not right. Maybe we need to be paying people to do more higher level work and figuring out how to outsource or automate some of the day-to-day tasks of their job or delegate. So realizing that all that extra stuff that you want to get done is part of the job, I think will change the idea of what really is quiet quitting. Because if quitting quietly just means doing your job description, well, that's what people should be doing anyway, right? So this norm of overcompensating and overachieving, I think is something that maybe needs to be revisited because it's not sustainable. And in the long run, if employees are burning out, they're going to be quitting, they're going to be turning over. They might go from just doing their job description well to even more withdrawn from the workplace. So in the long run, it benefits everybody, I think, to really reconsider what our expectations are of our employees.
And that leads us into welcome to the show, Alyssa.
Thank you.
We're excited to have you on Lattes with Leaders today. And Alyssa, your background is very different from others that we've had on the podcast previously. And I'd love to hear more about your background and how that's gone and what being successful in academia means for you.
Sure. So, um, starting way back in undergrad and college, I was really interested in psychology and particularly in this idea of how do people manage the different parts of their lives. Because I was in an Ivy League school, I was surrounded by the most brilliant women and men, but a lot, I really paid attention to these women who were feeling very conflicted. Their mothers were feminists and really cared about their career success and wanted them to invest in themselves and their careers. But at the same time, they wanted to have a life. They didn't necessarily want to just be working 24/7 and have that be the only part of their identity. And so I started thinking about how can I help people? And one of the ways I wanted to help people manage all that was through research and through science, because I really believe that there's a lot of gurus out there telling you how to manage work and life. And I wanted to be someone who could speak to the evidence of what really works. And I found this career path called industrial organizational psychology, which is a mouthful, but it's basically the psychology of people in the workplace. So now I'm a professor at DePaul University in the College of Business. So even though I'm a psychologist, I'm in a business school. So I get to teach and research and talk about work in the context of people's whole lives. A few months ago, I made the decision to move into a leadership and administrative role. So I'm now the chair of the Department of Management and Entrepreneurship, which is an exciting challenge, but not something that I had ever necessarily envisioned for myself, because it does take away time from research and teaching, which are the reasons I got into academia, to focus more on strategy, vision, but also on the day-to-day things of meeting our students' needs and scheduling. And that's the part where I was like, uh-oh, this is not for me. But it turns out that when you think about it in service of the more important questions that I'm really interested in, like how do we help our students grow into future leaders? How do we help our faculty and our staff make a meaningful difference in their lives? Then it all makes sense. And doing some of this administrative work that I had been trying, honestly, to avoid for the last 16 years makes a lot of sense. So that's where I am now in this new administrative role, but still keeping my toes in the research world as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it's quite a dramatic shift once you move to this leadership position and focus more on the strategic aspect of teaching and what it means to deliver a good education. And I'm curious because you've, researched what it means to be a good leader. How has maybe your research influenced your approach to your new role?
I think one of the things that I've really picked up through my research and through my work is always going back to the values, my values, the values of the institution. What are we really here to do and why? And then when every little decision gets made, kind of bringing it back to what are we trying to do here? What's the priority? So, and that's true too in the rest of my life. I have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, and in this new role, sometimes I'm going into work early, or I can't work remotely as much, or I'm coming home later. And I'm really trying to communicate with my kids and my partner what the values are that are driving those decisions. So it's not just, oh, now mom doesn't care about helping me with my homework anymore. It's, you know, we're all at different stages where they can have more independence and I can, dedicate more of my effort to this, and really doing a lot of that talking and understanding rather than just focusing on the surface level to-do list, which is really easy to do as a mom and as an employee.
It is very easy. And actually, I was reading some research. BCG did a study a couple of years ago on across 4,000 employees on, what are some of the characteristics of good leaders. And it came down to, three themes. The first being leading with head, so having a very clear vision and strategy on what you want to achieve in the organization. Leading with the heart, taking being empathetic, taking time to empower people and inspire people, and then leading with hands, so executing efficiently and innovating with agility. And it feels like it's very easy to fall in the trap of the executing and thinking that, because until you get to that leadership role, your promotions would have been based on, or in most cases, promotions are based on execution and being able to execute well, that people don't realize that the vision and strategy and having those clear values, as well as the empathy, is maybe sometimes new and not as well developed, but that's what actually makes a good leader, right?
There's a few key things that the best leaders do, and that tends to be pretty universal regardless of the context. So we know, and this echoes some of what you said, a good leader knows what their values are and the vision of where they want to go, whether that's their personal vision or their organization's vision. They're really clear on it. The next piece is being able to communicate that with other people. So a lot of leaders assume that everybody's on the same page and understands one another. So really talking about what are those values? How do we understand them? How do we enact them? What are our expectations of one another? And how do we work together? And just doing that clarifying work is another piece of the puzzle. Leaders are really good at understanding the present moment. So figuring out, whether it's through data or through conversations or through, reflection, where are we right now compared to where do we want to go? And then they're willing to experiment and explore new ways of doing things. So they're willing to look at that gap between where we are and where we want to go and try things, measure the results, reflect, try again, and mobilize the people around them to make that shift towards whatever that better future looks like. So that's sort of the universal sort of skill set of effective leadership, but applying it in any context, whether that's in your work or your family or your community, that's the tricky part.
Exactly. And I think that's where we really move into the bulk of your research, Alyssa, which you've really honed in on. How do you take those leadership skills that we discuss every day, we probably read about every day, we go on courses on an annual basis at work, and we try and incorporate into our work lives? How do you actually translate that into creating a life at home where you can still lead with those same sorts of values?
Yeah, so this is, as you said, this is where I've spent the bulk of my time. When I was working with my colleague Stu Friedman on our book Parents Who Lead, we also talked to lots of other working parents, dual career couples, single parents, in a variety of different life stages, to really understand how to take these ideas of leadership and bring them to all parts of your life. I can give you an example from this week. My son is 13. He just started 7th grade. And on the first day of school, he brought home his homework, and then he forgot one thing and he couldn't log into this thing. And already on day one, it was stressful. It was reactive. I was like, how did you forget your homework on the first day of school? Right. So we were kind of in that moment of just trying to get the homework done. And I realized that we needed to take a step back because it was turning into a fight between us. And we had to, we had a chat separately from the homework about what we're really trying to do. And the two things that we emphasized, one is we're a team. I'm trying to help him. I'm not trying to, you know, be mad at him. I'm not trying to, blame him. And then the second thing was that what we really wanted to emphasize was his learning, and spending all this time trying to find the right homework or trying to log into the right thing. That was using his very precious time and energy on things that weren't really learning. So we talked about why organization and why, managing your school supplies matters in the context of the value of learning, rather than just you're supposed to remember everything and never forget your homework, right? Because that's the reactive approach, is like, stop messing this up, or don't, you need to be more organized. Um, of course, with a newly teenager, who knows, whether the lessons will take the first time. But the conversation is different than the surface level conversation. The deeper conversation is, when you're organized, you get to spend your time and energy on learning. And that's the real value. We don't want to spend our time and energy fighting.
I love the idea of being able to set goals and be really clear on what your outcomes are at home. And then how can you achieve them as a team, as you said, together? A lot of what the leadership studies that Trisha referenced earlier, like the BCG study, for example, and there's another McKinsey study that demonstrates that interpersonal relationships and relationships with management are two of the key things that lead to employee satisfaction. And how well, Alyssa, do you think that translates then to the home environment? So actually building strong relationships within the family household to then be able to move forward and create that dynamic learning environment, versus having the conversation differently, as you pointed out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's essential. I think most of us, we don't want our relationships to be purely transactional. Even, with the people that we're in transactional relationships with, whether it's, a somebody that we employ, or somebody that we hire to do something in our house. We want deeper relationships. That's part of being human. And I certainly don't, with my husband, want to just have a relationship focused on, like, who's going to pick up the kid and who's going to do the dishes and who's going to walk the dog. And of course we have to have those conversations, but that's not fulfilling or satisfying if that's the whole deal.
So we've kind of discussed a little bit around what leadership means, and then those kind of personal connections and how to have those conversations. And I just want to bring it up a level to really consider, how does that all fit in?
Yeah. So one of the ideas is, one of the sort of the core ideas of our work is that you can be a leader in all parts of your life, and it will make all parts of your life better. And we really work with people and try to convince them through our evidence that it's possible to make the different parts of your life better at the same time. And we call that a four-way win. And the four refers to career, home, community, and self. So career and home are pretty straightforward. Community is your friends, your neighborhood, your religious or political affiliations, the people that you interact with that scaffold your work and personal relationships. And then, of course, the self is your internal world, your mind, your body, your spirit, your health. So we try to help people make changes in their life that make things better across all four domains, not just one. And certainly not one for the sake of the other. So many of us assume that if I want to perform better at work, I'm going to have to take something away from my family life, or take sleep away, or, give up time with friends. And what we want to get people doing is exploring really creative solutions to create wins across multiple life roles at the same time.
It's interesting that you have said this, that it's not a trade-off, right? It's all of these aspects of life work in harmony and almost reinforce each other. There's a tendency for people to think, oh, there's only one or the other, and I can only, if I really want to be successful at work, I have to put 70 hours per week into work, and there's no time for the other things. Well, actually, if you did the other things, you would be more efficient at work, and you maybe would, instead of 70 hours, it'll be like 40 hours, and you'll have time to commit to your other parts of your life, like your home, community, and self.
Absolutely. And we do have, our data looks like that when people experiment with these different changes, they do reduce their work hours slightly. Um, so they are working less, but their performance in the workplace actually goes up. So it is possible to improve your performance at work in fewer hours if you are good at communicating, at delegating, at being focused. There's so many tools that can help us be more efficient in the workplace.
Have you got any examples of research, um, or any of your personal examples that reflect on then how does this improve your home life as well? And what impact can it have in a positive way for the life outside of work?
During the pandemic, I would sort of work at home, and then whenever I felt bored of work, I would go exercise. So usually around like 11 o'clock, I would feel, okay, it's time to go work out. And then I'd go back to my work later. And that was great and flexible. Um, but now that the quarter's starting and I'm in the chair position, what I'm trying to do is get out of the house early at the same time as the kids and come home early and work out after work. And yesterday, and I was like, okay, the second I get home, you got to put on the workout clothes, because if it doesn't happen, then it's never going to happen. And my daughter came into the gym right as I was pushing play on my Peloton workout and said, I really want to be with you. I've been waiting for you. I want to play with you right now. Can you please do this later? And that was such a parenting dilemma, because I do want to be with her. I don't really want to work out at that moment. I would much rather hang out with my daughter. And I want to be a parent who says yes and is engaged with her. And so, you know, we took a moment, and, being who I am, I said, I really want to hang out with you too, but I think that if we wait 30 minutes and I get this workout taken care of, I'm going to be in a much better mood for the rest of the evening, and I'll be able to really focus on you. And so I'm going to keep going ahead with this workout. And it's not like she had a magical understanding and it was like, oh, yeah, of course, mom, that makes total sense. Please ignore me for the next half hour. Um, I did offer to do a workout that she could join in with. She did not take that option. Um, and she left, and she was a little bit annoyed, and I felt bad, right? It's not like the guilt left, but in that moment I had to make a decision, what's best for me and for her in the bigger picture, right? And the bigger picture for me meant that I said no in that moment with an explanation as to why. But that's sort of the a leadership mindset that's slightly different from a no, I'm working out right now, or yes, forget this plan, I want to be with you, right? There's something in between that hopefully leads to a better outcome for both of us, because I am role modeling caring for myself, and doing things that make me more effective across all parts of life.
And when you're saying this story, I can imagine that we've got so many parents who are nodding along to this, saying, "Yes, I get it. I get it. I've been in that position." Like, mom guilt is such a phenomenon, I think, for women returning to work after having children and really trying to balance what they need mentally.
I like how you've sort of described some of these experiments that you've tried on yourself, and they've
Mhm.
sort of helped you sort of improve your life. There are so many people out there, though, that struggle with even taking the first step, and, mm, like making an experiment for themselves to see how they can improve their lives. What is your advice to people who are just paralyzed with the concept of, introducing these other parts of life and of balance into their life?
Yeah, so that's a great question because it is hard. And people think that, oh my God, I need to overhaul my whole life. And now I need to, start waking up at 5 a.m. to work out and, do face masks at night. We start to have all of these shoulds and guilt, and it turns into this whole big thing. Um, and there are a few, tricks to getting really good at experimenting because any one experiment may or may not be successful. The key is, do you learn how to be a person who is willing to try experiments? So a few keys are: one, start small, start low risk. Don't do anything that's going to be, high risk to your job or your relationships, etc. Um, and to determine what are the metrics that are going to tell you whether or not this experiment is working. So how will I know if it's making things better? Whether it's, I'm going to rate my stress level on a 1 to 10 scale, or I'm going to see how many hours of sleep I get. Whatever the metrics are, you can set a time period and some metrics for yourself and say, okay, I'm going to try this for 2 weeks and see how it goes. I'm going to try right now working out after work for 2 weeks and see how it goes. If I never work out, it's clearly not the right experiment. But if I have those metrics in mind and saying, okay, if I can manage to get at least 4 days a week in, that means that this experiment of after work is working. And that way, whether it works or it doesn't work, you don't feel like it's reflecting on you as a human being and your willpower, your strength, your motivation. You just say, okay, it's an experiment. If this doesn't work, I'm going to have to figure something else out. I think a lot of people would say, I'm going to try working out after work. And then after a day or two where they just come home and don't feel like it, they interpret that as, I'm lazy, I'm not motivated enough, I am at fault here, and they feel bad about themselves. And instead, shifting that mindset to, okay, that's not it. That's not the solution. What else could I try? Because if an experiment works, it probably shouldn't be that hard to keep up. If you have to grit and fight to make a change in your life, maybe that's a good experiment. But oftentimes those are the ones that, just make you feel guilty and worse. And you don't have the motivation to keep them up. So thinking about, how do I try something for a set period of time as something separate than who I am as a human being? It's just an experiment. It's not that big of a deal. Try it, see, tell the other people in your life, hey, I'm trying this experiment, especially the people it affects. What do you think?
Yeah, and thank you so much for joining us on Lattes with Leaders. It's been amazing, particularly as a soon-to-be mum, to
Yeah.
actually think about how I personally bring a lot of this into my personal life, but even, I'm sure, Trisha, for yourself, how do you actually still play a role with building life that allows you to still be successful in every aspect of it versus just focusing on those clear career orientated goals? Don't forget to check out our more recent episodes where we connect with global female CEOs to explore how to make it to the top. Whether your ambition is to be an executive at a corporate, build a franchise, or pivot your traditional career, check us out. Be sure to give us a like or follow on LinkedIn, TikTok, or Instagram at Lattes with Leaders. Our mission is to hear the voices of women from around the world. So if you're an avid listener and want your voice heard through our platform, please reach out.